Hello, and welcome to a podcast about creating experimental art in trauma-informed and sustainable ways that support artists, our communities, and the organization as a whole. I'm your host, Molly, and you're listening to Any Other Anythings. In this season, we are focused on the latest project being produced by Graybox Collective. It is titled Positive Ruminations. So this is an event that will feature 4 new works, and each episode of this season of Any Other Anythings will feature conversations from the creative teams developing the new work. And we are really focusing on capturing the process and sharing out the things we find interesting along the way. Hope that you enjoy the season of Any Other Anythings. So up first, we have Empty. So Romeo and Lauren will be discussing what has been developed so far in the performance in the new work of Empty. And a reminder that Empty is looking at compassion fatigue, empathy fatigue, if you want to call it that, and just like how are we constantly inundated with news. All right, so enjoy their conversation.
My name is Romeo.
My name is Lauren.
I guess technically it's our second rehearsal, but whatever. Talk about like what we've done and also a little bit more about what Empty is.
I can speak on our process. We started the day with a little movement warm-up and then created some nuggets of movement using 5 to 3 gestures, incorporated some prompts before shaking off the cobwebs on our first get-togethers, nuggets that we created for Ultimate.
And our piece is Empty, which is about like compassion fatigue. We're doing a lot about like not being able to escape like the bad news and what that kind of has on it, what kind of impact that has on a person, just going about everyday life and how it's inevitable and you can't escape it, and more like.
So let's talk about some of the things that were created today. We can talk about like some of the stickiness, and stickiness being like what we're holding on to from last time, or what we feel like has staying power, I guess, in the little crumbs and nuggets that we're making. Because so often in device work, like we get rid of like 80% of what we make.
One of my top favorite stickies of the day was this little nugget we made called Charleston cups, where Romeo and I move in tandem, sometimes together and sometimes in opposition, but we're attached to each other by one cup, and the name Charleston comes from this like very impactful step that we take together.
We also kept like the reading of like the bad news while I'm trying to like kind of keep up with you reading it. I really enjoy that part. I think that that's like just very real to what it's like living in 2024 and the unable to escape kind of thing.
Also naming that this piece was originally started to be explored in 2019, late 2018s, pre-2020, and how it still feels like really relevant in this space. Yeah. Do either of you want to talk a little bit more about like kind of that impulse to be like, yeah, but we won't have technology. So that's how we're getting our info.
I like the use of the cups, and like it reminds me of like when you're a little kid and you got like the 2 cups of string, like talking to your friend on the playground, and then we talked about having like a soundscape for different coping mechanisms that you can have with all the bad news happening every day, and so like pill bottles or like a drink hitting ice and stuff like that. So like the cup is like, I feel like a really good representation of like what it's like to grow up nowadays too, where like it's all fun and games until it's just not anymore.
In the audio for the show, we're also looking at exploring having notification sounds. So what is it to hear all of that technology but never see it within the show? And that's something we're interested in playing with moving forward.
This moment, are there any other things?
Right before we're about to end, you talked about like, I have like break dancing background, and using that to either like escape all the newspaper or kind of like keep it contained, I think is going to be really cool to like figure out what that looks like, especially because that's specifically like my coping mechanism and all of that stuff, and kind of using the two to like push the idea forward, I think is
Definitely like bouncing off of the breaking background, that my go-to styles and like backgrounds of movement are not that. So seeing the opposition together on stage and like how those different forms can like complement each other is something that like really excites me about working with people overall, because I think that would be a cool audience.
I think compassion fatigue is like something that's a lot more talked about now, and so I think we're in a place where we can kind of acknowledge that, you know, the world is really terrible, and I think society itself is in that, like, okay, what do we do? We acknowledge that we all feel this way, we acknowledge that all these bad things are happening, now what? So maybe think about that as we like finish up the piece of like, okay, what next kind of thing. I think is really, could be really interesting to see in a movement way. What do we do next? What do we do with compassion fatigue if we feel it?
My hope is the audience finds a moment to look closer. I'm a big proponent of when looking for peace or beauty in something to like get smaller or to look closer at something rather than like on a more broad scale. So I hope the audience is able to like join us in finding a moment of like, what is it to cherish just one little moment in time when, you know, everything and especially happiness is so elusive to us. Love this for us.
Yes, it might have been intentional, but I think about like the compassion fatigue or just the like onslaught of media that we will have. I'm guessing it will culminate roughly the same time that this piece premieres. So.
Hey, listener, thank you so much for taking the time and energy to check out another episode of Any Other Anythings. Greatly appreciate your presence. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to find out more about this podcast, the speakers, and Graybox Collective. You can also go to grayboxcollective.com/podcast for a full transcript of this episode. Thank you again for listening. Thank you again for being here. Greatly appreciate it. Take care of yourselves and each other.